Murphy.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for coming in. And just to start, I know you're at pains to suggest that, and I believe it, that your objective here is to talk about the future, to talk about what's happening now. It isn't my objective. I think what's important here is to establish to what extent AIB facilitated tax avoidance and tax evasion, facilitating a very substantial robbery from the public purse. So just to go to the start, and in fairness in your statement, you do go back to the start of the establishment of the offshore presences in the Isle of Man and Jersey in 77 and 81. You said that the rationale for establishing this offshore presence was to support the bank's growing business franchise in Britain and the United States, and to meet the banking needs of the increasing international workforce. That isn't the real rationale for why the offshore entities were established, is it? I mean, Jersey and the Isle of Man have populations of about 80,000 people, and just over 160,000 people. What is special about them is that they're secrecy jurisdictions, whereby there are extensive banking secrecy laws. That the prime rationale for establishing it was to facilitate tax avoidance, tax evasion.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, it was an attractive location, and people used it.
Why was it an attractive location?
Well, it was considered a banking centre. It had people of varying mobile. I think the word that's also used is mobile in terms of workforces. So people were operating in different jurisdictions. So people who travelled and operated in many different countries did use it as a location. I'll go back to the piece that you won't like, which is that is what existed at that point in time. That's the rationale that exists in terms of documents that exist around why it was established. I wasn't there. It wasn't part of where the business is in terms of as we see it going forward. So I'm not sure of the benefit. I have a different view in respect to that, and I don't have access to a whole pile of data about what happened in 1977.
Okay, but just you said in the statement that the rationale for establishing the offshore presence was to support the bank's growing business franchise. But there's a reason that it was in the Isle of Man in Jersey, isn't it? And the reason isn't because there was loads of people there or they're very attractive destinations in terms of climate or anything else. The reason is because there were secrecy jurisdictions where there were significant banking secrecy laws.
Deputy, you can keep asking me the same question.
Yes, and that's because I'd like an answer.
No, but you want me. You've told me the answer you want me to give.
No, you just say yes or no.
Well, no, based on what I've said.
Okay, you don't believe that's the case. Okay, I don't think that's credible whatsoever. I find it hard to believe that you think it's credible that it's just an accident somehow that they get set up in Isle of Man and Jersey, but that's fine. We have an answer. Just to return then to some of the stuff that you're disputing from Colm Keena's article. The sentence in the article which says, leaked files from the Isle of Man offices of offshore law firm Appleby reveal government-owned AIB also refused to give the Revenue Commissioners access to data on its offshore customers when responding to a court order in 2015. You're saying that is simply inaccurate no matter what way you interpret that sentence. That's not a narrow...
No evidence whatsoever to suggest that that is true. So yes.
And when he later says in the article that a spokesman for the bank would not say whether it subsequently acceded to the Revenue Commissioner's request, can you make any sense of that?
So I don't know what the question was that was asked,
yes.
And I don't know how it was delivered as a response, but what we can say is what we've said here, which is we acceded to all 14 requests that were issued from the Revenue. So therefore, we might have been answering, sometimes we get asked questions that people know the answer they want, and we're given a different piece of the question. The question that we can answer is we complied with 14 requests.
But, I mean, in the answers to Deputy Doherty, it became clear that fine, formally you responded to the 14 requests, but certainly the Isle of Man and Jersey entities didn't transfer information that you requested to AIB PLC.
Yeah, and so the two parts, because we have two parts of this going.
Yes.
One is the High Court order process, which ran by the Revenue. So they were able to, when they were able to identify or have clarity around transactions they were pursuing, they went that way. The other piece, which was the opening question around what happened from the Revenue request in 2003, running through to the process in 2004 of writing through those offshore subsidiaries to customers saying, make a voluntary disclosure. So they were the two prongs, I presume, of the Revenue approach in respect to that, trying to capture both aspects.
And can you I mean, give a rationale for why the Isle of Man and Jersey entities didn't want to have the information, their data about their customers sitting in the Republic of Ireland, and ultimately got that information back. Why would they do that?
Well, fundamentally, at the end of the day, I think it's based on their assessment that in order to fully comply, or comply as fully as possible with laws in the Crown jurisdiction and their local regulatory requirements, they were better off having that data within that legal jurisdiction.
So you don't think that they didn't want the information in the Republic of Ireland because there it would be easier for the revenue commissioners to access? You don't think that's the reason?
And I think the piece that supports that is during that time period, there was a series of court orders running in existence anyway. So I don't think it influenced. I can't state exactly why they made that decision, because that was a decision they made, but I can certainly rationalise it, which I think was a request. I can rationalise it that the controller and owner of the data wanted that data to sit in the same legal jurisdiction as they were. So everything else presents a different risk, so I can rationalise it, and that's what I've done.
But because of the data sitting in the Isle of Man and Jersey, the revenue commissioners were not able to access that data.
And nor would they have been able to access the data were it sitting in a different jurisdiction, is my understanding, because the owner and controller of the data had a legal ownership of the data, and therefore the jurisdictional issue of where it sat, whether ignore AIB, if it sat on a Microsoft cloud somewhere, it would be still owned by a legal entity of a different jurisdiction. Sure,
but if it was sitting in Germany, revenue commissioners could go to court in Germany and seek to get access, and could get a court order in Germany, could seek to get access in a way that they're unlikely.
I don't know the data protection issues associated with Germany, how Germany protects.
Sure, I'm just taking Germany. There are other countries.
There are other countries that may have different reciprocal arrangements between the Crown jurisdiction, and so that may well be true. Couldn't comment on that.
But so the data that was held in the Isle of Man and Jersey never found its way to the revenue commissioners, despite the fact that it may have been interesting to the revenue commissioners.
No, I can't say that, because I can say that the data around customers may well have made it there, the data around transactions may well have made it there, but what wasn't ever subject to a High Court order was specifically targeted at the data that sat there.
But it seems to me you're at pains and go to quite substantial lengths to, when rationalising why this may have happened, to avoid the conclusion that it may have happened because they didn't want the revenue commissioners to get the data, and with the data sitting in the Republic of Ireland, it was easier to get it. Surely that's the most obvious explanation for why they took the approach to secrecy of their clients and the data that they did.
Confidentiality in banking, as hopefully is generally accepted, is very important to all customers. And the number one obligation that the owner of data in banks have is to try and respect customer data. And the various regulations and rules around that are pretty stringent. So it's not surprising to me that their number one objective is to always try and protect data. So the consequence of it may be what you're describing, but I'm not surprised, and I'm able to rationalise it the way I've talked about.
Yeah, and I think it's also to remember the context in which the data came to Ireland was we were winding down these subsidiaries, we wanted to hand the bank licences back, and it was an imperative that the data was on a secure server. That server happened to be in Ireland. It was an outsourced service, and a few years later it was a decision taken locally that the data should in fact reside in the Crown dependency. So the data was moved back to Jersey.
I mean, this is 2006. AIB was introducing a centralised transaction processing and data storage capability in the Republic. It's 2006 when it arises. So it's not at a point where the bank is being, where Isle of Man or Jersey are being wound down, no? They're still operating. They have billions in deposits, presumably, at that stage.
Yeah. Sorry, could you? So the question is.
So the answer there was that, well, it related to the wind down of operations, but that's not true because it was in 2006.
Sorry, I don't think we knew the time period you were asking the question about.
Sure.
So, but the point is still true, which is the data owner has the overall obligation, and that data owner kept that obligation, and they have a legal obligation in respect to that. And I think the evidence says it is important to point it out, which is the Irish legislature has thought at this point, and the only reason that High Court orders exist in respect to this data is to balance and to recognise in law the requirement that a High Court judge can sit and determine whether it is appropriate for the owner of data, which is interesting to the revenue, is actually entitled to pass it over to the revenue. So it's not an unusual principle. All legal systems have a principle around this about protecting it.
Okay. There's another reference in the article to up to the time the decision was made to close it in 2012, AIB Offshore saw itself playing a crucial role in the AIB group by getting business from, quote, high net worth individuals, the vast bulk of whom will be doing business with the bank for, quote, tax planning reasons, unquote. The documents show the resultant deposits could then be used by the group. Is that an accurate description of how AIB Offshore positioned itself as its role in the overall family that is AIB? Can
you remind me the time period that reference is there?
This is up to the time when the decision was made to close it in 2012.
Yeah. So so I can't find all the detail of all these documents, but I can tell you what happened process-wise, and I've covered it in overall terms when we talk about the strategy. So the strategic intent was that the offshore businesses were non-core. That then became a detailed implementation plan decision at the end of December 11, which I've talked about, which then rolled into 2012. Management, as that decision was coming and was given to local management, put in a position paper, local management, saying we believe that this entity could have an existence, it could have a viable future going forward. So it may well be that it's in that context that that piece is coming out of the documentation, I don't know. But that was not supported by the group and didn't happen. So it was not unusual, I suppose, for a subsidiary that was about to be closed down for the management with 300 employees to say we think there is a future for this business, but it didn't become policy or didn't become a position for the group.
So you don't think it's the case that that the majority of those who had accounts offshore with AIB were doing so for tax planning reasons?
I don't know.
Do you have an opinion on it? Because you expressed opinions on other things.
Well, I express opinions on things where I have experience and competence. I'm not a tax, nor was I in banking during the time period that you're referring to. And never was in banking during that time period, so I don't know.
But again, it just seems to me that you're willing to state opinions and come up with rationales when you can come up with them that don't point to what's staring everybody in the face, which is what these were operating to facilitate. Tax avoidance, at least, and tax evasion in terms of pre-1998 clients.
Well, I mean, I've said it a couple of times. I think that clearly the evidence does support the fact that some of these customers were involved in that, because ultimately the revenue were very successful in recovering amounts of money. So that is clearly true. But what I can't tell you is the amount of people who were involved in it, the numbers of people, what percentage of the book. But it is clear from the evidence that a number of customers were doing that. And that has come out in terms of how the revenue have gone about addressing the issue. But what I can't do is quantify or qualify that statement. So I agree with. So I'm not disagreeing with your principle that clearly some customers were doing that in the 1990s. But beyond that, I can't comment.
If I told you there was a letter sent on 15th of September 2015 by Appleby to AIB to the attention of Andrew Smith, head of AIB Group Legal Services, I mean that's a letter that comes in the context of you being in AIB. It's something that you would have a certain responsibility for. So the letter says, we've been instructed by AIB ISL Limited in respect of your letter of 3rd of September 2015, in which you ask whether AIB ISL Limited consents to AIB PLC reviewing customer data held on AIB's data server for documents relevant to the disclosure orders made by the Irish High Court, and if relevant, disclosing them to the Revenue Commission. It is not possible for AIB ISL Limited to consent. If that letter exists, as I believe it does that not illustrate that you misled the committee earlier when you said...
I think that's the exact point. That's the exact point that was being discussed.
I think it's the opposite. Explain that. Explain. You said repeatedly, and I asked you myself, that this statement in the article was inaccurate. Leaked files from the Isle of Man offices of offshore revealed that government-owned AIB also refused to give the Revenue Commissioners access to data on its offshore customers when responding to a court order in 2015. Again and again and again, you said that's not accurate, and here's a letter.
But sorry, but the comment that was made by Helen in respect of Deputy Doherty's comments stated that we did ask, could that data be presented?
You said that was not on foot of a High Court order, and it was not on foot of a request of Revenue Commissioners. Okay, but this letter says it's limited consent. ask whether AIB Isle of Man consents to AIB reviewing customer data held in AIB's data server for documents relevant to the disclosures order made by the Irish High Court.
Exactly.
No, not exactly. You said it was nothing to do with the court order just a moment ago.
So the request was, could we review the data in the context of figuring out was there any information that could be passed on? And they said no. There was no specific request. 2012 was the last time there was a request in respect of that information, that data.
I think it's an example of the clever answers of trying to avoid responding to the questions, trying to say that's not true because the court order isn't made in 2015, fine. But there's a response here illustrating that up to 2015, when you have to take responsibility, that AIB, Isle of Man, is refusing to hand over information on clients flowing from a High Court order.
But we stated quite clearly that the Isle of Man, I think all the way through, as the owner of the data, maintained its right to keep that data. I don't think that's different.
I think when we go back through the transcripts, I think we'll find it's quite different, and that, in my opinion, you were trying to mislead the committee by saying that article was wrong.
The High Court orders didn't seek access to that data. The High Court orders were served on, or were AIB, ROI was the subject of the High Court orders, and they related to, in total over the 8 years, about 50,000 transactions. What we did when we wrote the letter that you have the response to there, we asked the subsidiaries, in the context of the revenue investigation as a whole, would they hand over their data voluntarily, and they, as we thought, could not accede to that because of local legal and regulatory restrictions.
The High Court orders, when they come in, are very specific about specific transactions and ask about them, and we accede to that. This was a request to say, well, could we go beyond that in respect to that data?
Who's the beneficial owner of the companies in the Isle of Man and Jersey? Who's the beneficial owner?
They are part of the AIB group, so AIB is.
So therefore, as the ordinary person looking, I don't wish to, the ordinary person looking in is saying, if you're the beneficial owner, he who pays the piper calls the tune. If you're the beneficial owner of an institution, how can that same institution turn around to its parent company and say, we will not give information on deposits? Many of those deposits, which, based on the papers, found their way back to the AIB Republic of Ireland for use by AIB Republic of Ireland.
So, Senator, the position, everyone at various points.
The person is looking in, they're saying it makes no sense.
But unfortunately, the legality of the position is the thing that determines the answer, not how people might wish it to be true. Separate entity, separate regime, separate law, separate obligation in respect to data. The board, the AIB is only, by the way, just so we're clear,
Done by AIB Republic of Ireland.
interesting, and AIB's only response can be to constantly change the board. But if all the board is doing in that circumstance is complying with the law, then you're not going to get a different response. We deal with this issue regularly, by the way, in terms of banking positions. So when we have for example, our UK banking entity, which is based in London, is subject to PRA, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, and is subject to UK law. They have a very clear code, which is the same, would apply for all Crown jurisdictions, about the independence of mind in respect of subsidiary activities. It's part of the regulatory obligations. So the entity exists, it has a legal personality, and it has a form, and it has rights and responsibilities and obligations, and data is one of those that we know about. So I understand the point you're making. It's not that I don't understand the point. Unfortunately, the law is the law in respect of that issue, and it's different than subsidiaries exist, and therefore they have to go.
Senator,
General question. Just, do you accept that there's a moral problem with AIB, and it may have been, and I agree it's before your watch, but AIB having been bailed out to €7 billion with public funds, continuing to facilitate the robbery of other public funds by facilitating tax avoidance, at the very least? Is there a moral problem with that?
But I don't think that's what happened. I think what's happened since the period of the bailout, 2011, 2010, 2011 has been that the business has been focused on making sure it does deliver for the state, it does deliver for the customer base, and it does that by complying with the law and encouraging compliance amongst its customers. So,
but you hide behind the law in the Isle of Man and Jersey.
we don't hide. We don't
That's
hide
what
behind
you've been doing the whole time. That's what the letter reflects. Is you're hiding behind the law. That's why it's there.
We comply with the law. We comply with the law.
Yes, but the law is very friendly to banks in secrecy jurisdictions and avoiding people having revenue officials getting information. It's just so convenient that you happen to be set up in two jurisdictions that the law means that revenue can't get access to the information and facilitates people avoiding tax. And you might say, oh, it wasn't the intention to do it. But sure, if you set up there, of course that's what people are going to do.
But all I can say is, again, is they are closed. They don't exist from that point of view anymore. So the activity that we're engaging in doesn't involve that.
Thanks. The Senator report.